The reasonableness of costs spent on a federal award is a cornerstone concept of the cost principles regulations. But how do you tell if costs are reasonable? In this section, we will look at how you can determine if costs are reasonable and therefore pass the first hurdle of allowability for award spending. In the federal cost principles, reasonable costs are defined as an amount of an expenditure that doesn't exceed the amount a person using good judgment and common sense would have spent on a purchase. This is sometimes called the prudent person standard. The term reasonable measures the decision under the circumstances in place when the decision was made. For example, the cost of a bottle of water may be very different in the middle of a desert than in the middle of a major city, though both purchases could be considered reasonable to a prudent person. A component of the definition for reasonable includes looking at the necessity of the spending. Necessary costs are needed for the performance or administration of the federal award. Examples of questions that test the necessity and therefore the reasonableness of a purchase are: do I really need to make this purchase for the award? And is this the least amount I could spend and still meet my needs for the efficient and effective performance of the award? Some additional questions you can ask to test the reasonableness of award costs are: can I reasonably expect to use the amount of the product or services I am purchasing? Next, did I pay a fair price for the items? And finally, would I feel comfortable defending this purchase to a taxpayer or the federal agency? Now let's look at some red flag areas that are reviewed in determining reasonableness of costs. Reasonable costs would be consistent with generally accepted sound business practices and arm's-length bargaining. The federal agency may also look at the market prices for comparable goods and services in assessing whether the costs are reasonable. Next, the costs may be viewed to see if the costs were incurred with significant deviations from established practices. Remember, actions that unjustifiably increase the cost to the federal government would not be considered reasonable according to the regulations. If costs are not defendable as reasonable, they risk being disallowed by your funding agency. Finally, when determining the reasonableness of costs, individuals should use good sense and consider their responsibilities to the best interests of the federal government, the taxpayers, and their own organization.